Hello, welcome to the Citrus Garden. My name is Christina. This is a reading for twin flame union energies. It's meant to be for both divine masculine and divine feminine. I'm putting it in a sort of a general collective kind of union energy reading for you today. And the focus of this reading is, what is the current energy? How can you shift your focus? And where is an area of growth? So let's get started with the bottom of the deck energy. So it is the Trust card, and this is the whole reason why I wanted to do a reading like this, because of what this card means to me, is especially in a twin flame connection, but also in just all relationships or connections in general between two people. There's you, there's the counterpart, the other person, and you are both individuals in your own sort of bodies, own energies, that kind of thing. However, there is a third energy that is created between the two of you that is independent of both of you, right? It's like an independent energy that has its own ability to sort of manifest and clear the way and all of that. And it's built on trust, right? It's built on trust and love, which is also part of your reading today. And so I wanted to sort of read that energy, read the third energy of the connection, if that makes sense, and sort of what that energy is encouraging both counterparts to focus on in order for this union to happen, is kind of how the reading is wanting to unfold today. And then you have here liberation and connection, which is so interesting because this liberation card was a focus of yesterday's Libra reading. If that's something that you're interested in watching, I'll link it up above. But it's basically just talking about liberation from any sort of connections, behaviors, crutches perhaps, or it could be heavy emotions, that kind of thing. Anything that sort of keeps us contained and prevents us from expansion of some sort. With this connection card today, because it is sort of talking about the union, but it's kind of feeling like the other connections that are not the twin flame connection, where there are things that connect you or tie you to other people or behaviors or things that perhaps might not be serving and may actually be put in this sort of like container energy, right? It's like it's keeping you from moving to liberation is kind of how it's feeling. And I'll go into what that will be just generally. And then here, this is at the bottom of the deck for the tarot that I'm using today. We have the King of Swords and the Emperor, which is really good because I'm trying to keep it I'm trying to not focus too much on one counterpart or the other. It's something that both of you can be sort of working on, but it did come out like this for the bottom of the deck. This is the only sort of indication of what that is. I feel like for the divine masculine, of course, embodied by the Emperor, is sort of doing a lot of work in order to clear any sort of connection, behavior, that kind of thing. I feel like it's not necessarily another person. It could be though, but any sort of connection or tie or string that might sort of be preventing any sort of movement forward, especially with the King of Swords here, that talks about having to cut ties, right? Actually having to cut ties, because I always see this one as being sort of on a mountain, separated from others, right? Kind of in isolation perhaps, or like but has a lot of sort of thinking to do. Perhaps it might be, right? I'm seeing this one as being sort of in isolation, doing a lot of thinking and trying to figure out what it is that they have to do next, or what the next move is, that kind of thing, especially with the chess, right? It's like figuring out what the next move is kind of how I'm seeing this. And then here, divine feminine, I'm seeing this as being, because this Knight of Wands is surrounded by the Four of Wands, right? So it's being in the energy of union with the Lover's energy as well. I always see that sort of as being a twin flame card, especially in this deck. Being in the energy of union independently, right? It's like you, Divine Feminine, are in this energy of just like focusing on what union would feel like sort of on your own, right? Like independently within yourself, or just like surrounding yourself in the energy of union, whatever that means to you, however that plays out for you. Just perhaps just like embodying the energy of what this moment is going to feel like is kind of how it's coming through. So that's the underlying energy. And then we're going to go into what's the current energy. So these two cards came out, the reflection in the space. So this reflection card, because of course the twin flame connection is all about mirroring one another. But it kind of feels like self-reflection, right? Like perhaps doing, because this is a very sort of hermiting energy. You didn't get the hermit in this reading today, because I feel like the hermit always implies sort of like independence. So it's what this hermiting energy is feeling like today is self-reflecting so that you can make space is kind of how this is feeling today. Because you have here with the other cards out, we have this emptiness card and the intention. So this intention card came out in the last Divine Masculine reading, which I'll post at the end of this video, but it was talking about actually having to pay attention to energies that are very similar and can be sort of mistaken for one another if you're not sort of clearly putting labels or boundaries up on it. And I feel like for this, actually, what's interesting about this is I was kind of getting the idea of like making space for one another, right? It's like, especially for twin flame connections, you don't want to bring all of your sort of baggage into that connection, right? All of the sort of pain, all the wounding, because there's so much mirroring that happens, there is an awareness here, or, I mean, the current energy is that there's an intention to sort of clear space or clear out any sort of baggage, any sort of wounding that can be eventually reflected in the connection, right? Because I feel like there's a lot of like, if you were hurt as a twin, you were going to reflect that hurt or that wounding onto your counterpart. Absolutely. That's why there's so much triggering that happens in the connection, is because the other person is so capable of reflecting back to you an image of yourself that you don't want to bring in any of your pain to the connection, because that will inevitably be reflected back to you, is kind of how this is feeling today. So the next two cards out you had here are emotions, which is all of that, right? This card is so fascinating to me today, or in general, because it's been coming out a lot over the past couple of weeks. So I feel like there's this general energy of just like really taking a good hard look at your own emotional state. Because I often see this as being like a really beautiful light display. If you've ever been to like the aquarium in Toronto, the jellyfish display is absolutely gorgeous, right? It's just like they put a lot of lights into it. It's very vibrant. The background sort of sticks out from the jellyfish. Like, it's just beautiful, right? But there is sort of the risk, especially because it's coming in with emotions and with this sort of liberation energy of like, if you are not conscious of the fact that this is a light show, that it is a display, you can sort of get stuck and lost in that energy where it's like you just stay there for way too long, right? Longer than you intended. But there's sort of like the whole aquarium to actually explore. And if you just spend time sort of in this emotional state, you're kind of missing out on everything else that there is to display. Like, there's so much else that you can see or engage with, and being stuck in sort of this one-dimensional kind of light show is what I'm calling it. It can sort of, like, you can get stuck in it, basically. And that's not sort of an energy that you want to necessarily be in for a long time, right? So I feel like for you, the current focus for both counterparts in this dynamic is that you are moving out of this place because of this synthesis card, which is so interesting. This is the first time I've seen this card since I've been using this deck. So I had to look it up and what this was talking about. But of course, synthesis means coming together, right? And so especially with this sort of emptiness card, both of these two cards coming out in the same spread, was talking to me about making space in your perhaps emotional state, emotional well-being, so that you can make room for the synthesis or the coming together. That's kind of what the current energy is feeling like. And that involves a lot of sort of self-reflection, but also not getting stuck in that, right? Like if you're in hermit mode, you can absolutely take that too far where it's just like you become completely closed off. And there is this energy of needing to sort of liberate yourself or come out of hermit mode, right? That could be kind of a difficult transition if you are too drawn into this energy. But the good news is that you have here Page of Cups, which is this energy. It's like you are in sort of this state of being drawn into some sort of emotional topic, focus, perhaps, but actually like lifting up out of that state, right? It's like moving on to the next display or moving on to the next part of the aquarium is kind of just how this is coming through today. And then you have here the Four of Wands, which I love so much because it's like actually just like stepping out of the aquarium and going to the circus is kind of how, like, it's a whole new sort of phase. And I feel like that's the current energy, is that there is kind of this transition, especially if you're like in hermit mode for a long time, or if you like live alone, because there's a lot of like sort of house downloads that I was getting before doing this reading of like living in a house by yourself, right? As sort of representing you taking care of your own emotional state, well-being, spiritual sort of wholeness, that kind of thing, your house, your being, and then moving in with somebody else, right? Like if you're used to living alone and moving in with somebody else, you do have to make space for that other one, right? You have to make room for them. You have to clear out any sort of debris or excess or things that you don't need or things that are not going to serve, right? You have to sort of make space. And I feel like that's what this Four of Wands is like moving from one environment, which is representing the aquarium today, and moving into the circus, which is a whole different experience, which is kind of what this is talking about. And then here you have the Justice card, which I love so much because this one always talks to me about if you create space in your life with the cups, and if you hold still long enough, the universe will fill it, right? The universe will fill the space that you create in your life with something. And I feel like for me, especially because it's coming out with this reflection card, which I'm seeing as the sort of the two cups, it's like both of you are making space or emptying sort of this emotional cup environment, whatever that is, making space in your emotions, perhaps in your emotional space, to allow the other one to move in, is kind of how it's feeling today. And then you have here the Ace of Swords and the Ace of Pentacles, which is absolutely gorgeous because it's talking about a new start, right? It's like clearing out all of this, because I see this as like going down into the basement, right? Like going down into the basement and just removing anything that does not belong there, anything that's been in storage for years that you've never used, that kind of thing. Or it could be the opposite. You could be moving a whole bunch of stuff that you need room for and putting it in the basement. There's all of that too. But the Ace of Swords, of course, talks about clarity. So I feel like both counterparts are sort of getting clarity about the situation or what needs to be shifted and moved, putting really intentional effort into clearing and making space for the other one. And there was something here about synthesis as well, which I forgot to mention, because this synthesis card came with the, in the guidebook, it came with the story of how, like, if you have a spider web that has a whole bunch of dewdrops in it, each dewdrop is reflected infinitely through the other dewdrops. And so that was the sort of metaphor of putting in that each action that you take is reflected and has an effect sort of times infinity, right? Every single action or intention that you put out has an effect. Whether or not you can see it necessarily or not, there will be sort of a resounding, reflecting consequence in sort of the greater scheme of things. And what's interesting here as well with the sort of the rays is kind of like perhaps your focus was split, or there was a lot of different kind of energies being mixed together. That's what the Divine Masculine reading was about, is that a whole bunch of things that were similar, which is going to come into the next section, a whole bunch of energies that were similar, like love, comfort, and sweetness. They're all sort of elements within a greater umbrella term, kind of. But really focusing in on one of them, or focusing in on the truth, is kind of how this dynamic is playing out. And this Ace of Pentacles, because I always see this as an offering, right? Or something being offered, something physical being offered. The thing about this is that it's a seed. So it is small. It starts off small, but it has within it all of the sort of nutrients and things and structure needed to grow into a bigger, sort of giant, long-lasting thing, a living thing. It is a living thing. It's a living thing that has everything that it needs to succeed, is kind of how this is talking about. So that will be different for each of you. I feel like perhaps each person, because we have two aces as well, it could be that one person is sort of focusing on clarity or on clearing out any sort of energetic or thought-based debris that doesn't belong, while the other is sort of focusing on growing some sort of material thing that will have long-term consequences, kind of how it feels. But it doesn't have to be that. Both people can sort of be working on this together, is kind of how it feels. Okay, so I'm going to move on to how can you shift your focus. While I was preparing for this reading, I absolutely knew that this card was going to come out, the love card. I knew it was going to come out. It came out right away. I laughed. It was a moment, but it seems kind of obvious, right? Like how to shift your focus. Focus on love, just generally. But the catch in this is that the next two cards that came out were sweetness and death. And so the difference between these two cards, right? Because they're so similar. They're both sort of pink energies. They both have a heart. They both make you feel good. The difference, or the metaphor that was coming through with this, just sort of personally in my focus has been on like choosing or focusing on full, healthy, balanced meals compared to something that's like sweet and makes you feel good, but has perhaps less nutritional value, right? Because I love to bake. I love baking. It gives me comfort, and has a positive result at the end that I can sort of touch and feel and feel good from. However, there is this sort of, because it's coming out with the death energy, it's perhaps asking you to focus on cooking rather than baking, is kind of how it's coming through. Something that has more long-term benefits is better for you, even if it's like not your first instinct or what you're comfortable with, or something that you're used to, because this sweetness card, how it plays out usually is like things that give us a boost, perhaps energetically, in the short term, right? It's like short-term pleasure. Like there's so many different ways that the sweetness element can play out in your life compared to love, the difference between these two, because they're so similar and can easily be confused as how it's feeling. And so for you, having to sort of put the intention on detangling what these two energies are, because they're so similar, right? The color difference is almost imperceptible. But if you are sort of tuned to your own habits, your behaviors, the connections between you and other people as well, you can sort of be able to start to discern the difference between love and sweetness, something that's long-term and something that's short-term, in terms of like your benefits and energy and all of that. Okay, so the cards that came out for these ones, because the two energy, it's so interesting. The Mask and Protection. These two cards have come out so many times in the last couple of days. This one came out in both the Divine Feminine and Masculine readings that I did 2 days ago, I think it was. And what's important about this is the sweetness energy, right? The things or behaviors or people that we turn to who help us to sort of maintain these two energies, which are Mask and Protection, which in the short term can be quite beneficial, right? It's like this energy of self-protection, especially if you're like trying to enforce boundaries between you and somebody else who is perhaps not in a positive energetic state. The energy of self-protection is extremely necessary in order to withdraw your energy. The thing is, if you are in any of these two energies in the long term, it puts you off balance. Because I just noticed today for the first time that there's this circle here behind the Mask card where it's like the energy is not centered, right? It's not aligned. Same thing with the Protection card, is that if these energies are maintained for the long term, it puts your energy off balance because it is hunched over, and there is sort of a masking effect happening in this one. And that's what the Sweetness card does. Like if you just consume sweets and pastries, there's no nutritional value. Your body's not going to feel right. It's not good for you in the long term, even though like in moderation, it can be helpful, right? Is kind of how this message is coming through. I know that's going to trigger somebody. It was almost triggering for me, but I'm going to keep going. So here you have the Breath card that came under the Mask. So if you are in this energy of sort of putting on a mask or shielding yourself in some way, or not presenting sort of the fullness of who you are, because you'll notice here the similarities of these two cards, right? Like the position is the same, the eye contact is there, but this one is not wearing a mask. They do have sort of like the difference between expression, like self-expression, and hiding is kind of how it feels. Like today it was coming through very like Phantom of the Opera, right? Like there is a line between self-expression and hiding oneself. And it's kind of like this balance of there is a very subtle shift that is needing to be taken in this dynamic, whoever is representing this energy. And that's sort of up to you to walk that line, right? It's very, very subtle, a very subtle shift that can be taken. And here with the Protection card as well. The Protection card is coming out with the Gratitude. Because again, the stances are so similar, but has a drastic difference where, because this energy is hunched over, opening up sort of the chest area, like leading from the heart but both of these, there is sort of a dynamic here of shifting to vulnerability is kind of how it's feeling today. But I feel like it is something that both twins need to work on. Both counterparts need to work on. I'm going to pause here though, because we are at 25 minutes. I'm going to go immediately into the extended, so you can watch that right after this. Thanks so much for sharing your energy with me, and I'll see you in the next one.